So today we have two special guests. We have Eric Gordon, Associate Professor.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure?
Yes, that's
Okay.
Full professor.
Professor in Emerson at the Visual Culture Media. Did I get it right?
No, Visual Media
Arts.
Yeah.
You see. At Emerson. And Steve Shara.
Yes.
Yes. Also at Emerson, and they are in the Engagement Game Lab, and they're developing really cool stuff. And I invited them over because I thought that, first of all, what they were doing was kind of fascinating and relevant to what we do, and it would be good to know on people from game labs around Massachusetts. But also because I think that there can be a certain exchange here, like what they're doing, what they're learning from what they're working on, and also maybe we can give them some feedback from the more video games or game design aspects, which is what our turf is. So here you go.
I didn't know it was a turf war, but yeah.
It's not turf war, it's more like...
Let's go, come on. Thank you. And it's great to have an opportunity to speak to you all about this. And so we're going to talk about the game that we're working on now. So I don't have anything complete to show you in this game that we're working on now, and I won't go through a history of other games at this point. But really, I want to talk about a particular problem space and where we're trying to create games and what we're calling local engagement games, and this sort of specific the nuance to the problems of designing around this idea of a local engagement game. So, specifically, just to give you some sense of what we're doing, is that we're building games, or rather the game that we're building right now is in the context of urban planning. So what we're doing is we're designing a game around an existing sort of social process that does exist, and specifically the community engagement piece of urban planning. So just a little background about urban planning, very, very briefly. Generally, urban planning is an expert-guided process, right? So the idea is that the expert knowledge meets local knowledge. That's the kind of concept of the citizen engagement piece of urban planning. So a planner or an architect would go to the community and ask for, in some cases, feedback, in most cases, feedback, about a particular planning proposal, or depending on what stage the planning process is in, it could be feedback around just sort of general concepts around what one wants from the future of their neighborhood, specifically in a master planning process. So the ideal then is this expert knowledge meets local knowledge. So which is true with any kind of realm of expert knowledge. When you're bringing in kind of lay knowledge or local knowledge into any sort of process, there is always a conflict between the role of the expert and the role of the layperson, and how they actually can share resources to come up with something better. So if in the case of urban planning, the planner, the planning consultant, or the architect calls a meeting, it's typically a town hall meeting of some sort, calls a town hall meeting, brings the community into a town hall meeting, and typically has some form of engaging the group of people. Usually it's something like this, like a PowerPoint presentation that would show some slides of some possibilities for what could happen in the neighborhood. And then there's some element of interactivity that typically happens in these meetings, where they'll put posters around a room and people will put stickers on the things that they like best. So there's a simple sort of voting mechanism that happens in a lot of these meetings. And then that stuff is aggregated and then fed back to the community in such a way where it's usually the next meeting, which might happen 3 or 4 months later, the planner will say, this is what you said, which is of course a bastardization of what actually happened, but that's the process. So what's interesting about the citizen participation piece is that it's federally mandated. So it's a really interesting area. We're not planners, obviously, but it's become a very interesting space to work in, because it's this federally mandated participation in a feedback process. I'm sorry, it's not, participation isn't federally mandated, but the outreach is federally mandated. So, for instance, anytime there's a development project of any significance that happens in a neighborhood, the developer or the city or whatever entity it's coming from has to go and consult with the community. So, and this actually comes from a history of urban renewal in the United States. It's a reaction to the sort of 1950s and 60s destruction of inner cities in the United States. The kind of Robert Moses tear it all down without consulting communities pattern that we went through, and you know, you can see it all around Boston. That's a result of that. So what we've ended up getting in the United States anyway are these policies that say, okay, well, to avoid that kind of problem where the expert comes in and says, what's best for you is progress, and we're going to tear down this neighborhood and we're going to put up government center. Then to avoid that in the future, we're gonna say that you have to go and consult. Now, what's interesting about this is that the nature of consultation is totally uneven, and what ends up happening is that planners will typically go to a community, consult because they have to, and then go ahead with their process anyway. And one of the traditional rhetorical strategies is to show people 3 options. One of them is clearly good, the other 2 are clearly bad, and then you have the community kind of you guide them in that way. So that's it. And this is I sometimes I come across as too negative against planners, and I think it's not the fault of the professionals. It's actually the fault of it's the problem of the situation, which is experts need to do their job. And their job gets incredibly complicated when you enter into this democratic process, which is absolutely messy. And getting people involved and giving people a sense of having a voice and all of that stuff when you're engaged in a design process is really hard. It's like designing a game and saying, okay, public, you decide what goes in it. That's an impossible proposition, and yet it has to happen in this urban process all the time. And then one of the other things is that the actual community outreach piece is not at all emphasized in planning education, which is another problem. And then so what's come about is this tension between user participation and user management. So in the sense, and I call users, like the citizens essentially. So one thing is, well, we want to get people involved, but the other thing is we want to control that involvement. One of the terms that's often used is manage. We want to give people the ability to manage their expectations. So we want to invite them in, but we don't want them to expect that what they say will actually have an effect, essentially. And that's, again, it's a problem. It's how do you do that? How do you actually invite that engagement without empowering people falsely in a process that is complicated? Okay, so this is I don't know how helpful this is, but let me just talk about where we're going. And so when we set out to design, so we wanted to design a game around this urban planning process. And what's interesting about this is it's a process already in place, in a way. It's a form of engagement that already has rules. And so how can we use, where we came about this, and we did some other projects in this space as well, but this one that I'm going to talk about is really I think a more fully fleshed out version. How can we take this existing process and build on top of it and use a kind of existing rule base to create a kind of common sense notion or common sense strategy to engagement for people using a game as a scaffolding. So when we talk about local engagement games, that's really the way that we approach this, which is it's not just a game that engages people, but it's a game that engages people in local matters and all of the issues that come along with local matters, like geography here. Geography is a really important part for community identification. It's an important part for identification with whatever kind of game space you create. The community or the people, existing, instead of an online community where you'd create a platform and then communities develop around that platform, what we're doing here is we're basically assuming that there's some sense of an existing place-bound community that's there, and that we actually want to use the game as a mechanism of enhancing or augmenting that existing identification with a place-bound community. And then finally, processes, which is designing around an existing process. So while there are these existing processes in place to engage people in community in community planning, how do we not negate? How do we avoid the saying, well, the town hall meeting be damned, We want to come up with an entirely new way of engaging people, but instead we're looking at how do we take that thing that's already in place and build on top of it. Steve, do you want to say anything more about that?
I mean, another consideration for this type of engagement is just the style of the meeting. And I mean, if you ask any planner, they'll tell you these kinds of meetings are contentious. And there are the 5 people that come to the meetings, and they have the same speech and the same kind of things I think are important. And those are the ones that speak at the meeting. And something that's coming up in planning now is they're using these clickers, and you can actually vote. And people are so excited because they actually feel like they're doing something at the meeting. People really want to participate. And in talking to planners, I say, it's really hard for someone to come into a room in front of everyone and, be shown these new plans and have something to actually say about them right then. So planners are looking for new ways to engage in this space, and that's kind of another reason we're trying to apply games to this, because something as simple as a clicker can improve engagement that much. Just think about improving the entire process, not just kind of one kind of passive method of engagement.
And I should say that the previous projects we did, one was a game-like project called Hub 2, which used Second Life, and another one was called Participatory Chinatown, which was more of a fully fleshed out game. Both of those projects were games designed for people to play in a physical space of the planning meeting. So we actually took the planning meeting and we set up the computers, and we had multiplayer, essentially multiple multiplayer games taking place in a large community meeting. And we could talk a little bit more about that later if we have time. But the idea there is that we really use the concepts of it was all about role play. It was all about getting people out of their skins for a little while, and having to make decisions as somebody other than themselves before they got to make their decisions about what they think that planning ought to be. And that was really successful. The shortcomings of that is that it was a game designed only for the physical space of the planning meeting, and what we're doing now is we're trying to expand those 4 walls and think about ways of again, not sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, keeping the planning meeting in place, but having all these other methods and platforms for engagement. So I'm going to just skip over that and talk about, so here's our project, Community Planet. This is our project in development right now that we hope to be done, we will be done by April. This is a platform, and the platform is essentially it's a platform that can be used in any community context is the idea. But it's any community context where there is a planning process going on. So it's a game that's designed for what we're calling a curator, someone who will curate the content. So it's not like it's not like a game that you can just sort of log on, put your city name, and start playing. Like it has to have content added into it that sort of steers the gameplay towards the very specific issue of the planning process. The other thing that I think that this game has going for it is that the incentive for playing the game is actually an official process. So we're not asking people to play a game that might be parallel to or might have some reference to some sort of process going on in the neighborhood, but we're saying this is something that the people in the city, in some cases the mayor of your city is supporting, is listening to. So there's that sense of being listened to that's part of that engagement piece of like getting people to log on for the first time and actually play this game. I'll just show you the little teaser video that we developed, and I'll talk about the platform.
Okay, well, the next item on the agenda is vacant lot number 8934. Ah, yes, lot 8934, my architectural legacy. Well, don't hold back. Let me hear your ideas for this space. Well, let's see. How about a high-rise? Now, that's something I wouldn't mind getting in on the ground floor with. I second that. Wouldn't we all? But I think there would be some conflict of interest with that idea, John. Well, what about a museum? Or a park? No high-rises, no museums, no parks. Good grief, we have plenty of these things in our town. I'll tell you what we need. A state-of-the-art parking lot. That or a landfill. If only there was a way to involve the community in this process. The community? That's preposterous. I don't see how that could ever work. Cindy, you're proposing that everyone take part in the planning process? Wait, if I'm hearing this correctly, you're suggesting we let the community plan it.
So you got a sense of the the general tone of the game, and let's talk a little bit. You want to take them through this, Steve?
Yes. So this graphic kind of represents how we see the overall structure of the game. So I think we said we need about 10 weeks to launch the game. So the game starts off by partnering. For right now, since we're working with the Knight Foundation, and we're working with their communities, so we found partners in Akron and Philadelphia. So we're actually partnered with 2 local groups that are working on planning processes. So for example, we're working with the Village for Arts and Humanities in North Philadelphia. And they're working on, they manage over 1 million square feet of land. And they develop art parks, they have youth programming. Anyway, so they have constituents they need to consult about, what to use this land for and things like that. So we work with them and decide, okay, we're going to start this game. So before that, we work with them to kind of fill in all the content for the game. So the game is 6 weekly missions, and each takes place, each focuses on one aspect of the plan. So here, you can see at the bottom the values, so maybe safety, housing, parking, open space, identity, and walkability are all kind of concepts that they want to engage their constituents in.
Let me just interrupt for a second. We should say that this is primarily a mobile game. It's going to be it's designed for mobile and web-based interaction, but really we're designing for kind of touchscreen mobile phones.
Yeah. So there'll be a launch date, there'll be a kind of kickoff, and the game will open, and so you kind of create your profile, and throughout the game you're kind of earning these I would call them value coins. What are they called? Planet coins? Planet coins. So after I do a certain amount of things in the game, I actually get these coins that I can spend and kind of say these are where I hold my value. So you can kind of see a sample there. They picked open space as their most important value. So they'll be playing that along the way. And each, I guess the next.
Well, actually, let me emphasize that more. The game is divided up into 6 weeks. Each week there's a different mission, a themed mission. So here's an example of some missions: safety, housing, parking, open space. Each mission will have particular actions to do within the mission. We'll talk about that in a second. But the player will be privy to the 6 missions that are going to happen throughout the 6-week gameplay at the very beginning. And the game starts off and they're given, and we haven't fully decided this yet, but the idea at this point is that they're given 10 coins to begin the game. And they can spend those coins any way they want, and they can spend the coins on their values, as you see here. And throughout the game, and as they play the game, they're earning points that will then earn them more coins so they can spend on their values. The idea is that the real motivation for playing this game is to amplify one's voice in the process. So if open space is the most important thing to me in this planning process right now, then I'm going to work hard so that I can earn more coins, so that when all these things are added up in my community, open space gets priority. This is one of the things that players are not going to be, they're not going to be able to see the running tally, we think, of the way that people are spending their coins until the very end of the game. At which point they meet up right here, where there is going to be a live component to this, where the idea is that players come together, community come together, and then at that point it's disclosed, this is how the community has spent their coins. So that it's one of those things that we find that the idea, that the motivator of this game is simply to collect those coins and then to spend them to get your voice across. We feel like that's a pretty strong motivator for the game. Again, every week, every mission is timed, so every Sunday there's going to be a new mission that's announced, and the player will have access to all the things that are going to happen in that new mission. So we talk about let's go through the mission actions. So these are the actions that would actually happen in each of the themed missions.
So first, this is the mission brief. So the curator will kind of say, this is why we're looking at open space in our community, and this is why we need to think about it. In Philadelphia, it's because we manage all these art parks, and we need to start thinking about how we want to use them, who will use them, and and how even the smallest thing, like what kind of shrubbery goes in these parks, matters. I was just talking to one of our partners yesterday, and she was talking about how when she first moved into the neighborhood, she tried to build these shrubs, and all of her neighbors were really mad about it because they said, you know, people can hide behind these, and it's actually really dangerous. I mean, small things like that, the community really does care about. So anyway, so this kind of gives context to why we're talking about open space. And then we're also going to have a video that goes with it that kind of explains kind of the broader ideas, planning perspectives on, you know, what open space means to a community. And then these other actions are kind of more interactive. So think fast is kind of this kind of a quick emotional perception, and we see this as kind of the first thing you do when you log in. It's kind of these fast questions that you answer, and it kind of gets plugged into the community.